Canadian Business is proud to host the first ever New Innovators Summit, an exciting lineup of thought-provoking live and virtual programming with some of Canada's biggest leaders in partnership with the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Canadian Business Development Bank of Canada. Thank you for joining our second Fireside Chat of Canadian Business's New Innovators Summit with today's guest, Noura Sakkijha, co-founder and CEO at Mejuri. Growing up in Jordan as a third-generation jeweler, Noura noticed that the traditional high-end jewelry brands always targeted men, encouraging them to buy luxe jewelry for women, so she wanted to change that narrative. Noura's products have been worn by A-list celebrities like Selena Gomez, Lizzo, Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, Oprah, and many more. Since launching in 2015, Canadian-owned jewelry company Mejuri has redefined the luxury goods market. Welcome, Noura.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So on to some quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Please make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll open up an audience Q&A at the end of this chat. So now I'd like to introduce our hosts, Charlotte Herrold, Editor-in-Chief at Canadian Business. Thank you both so much for your time today. I can't wait to listen to this amazing chat, and take it away, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Chantal. And hello, Noura. It's so nice to see you. I'm so excited for our chat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I think let's start off with a little bit about your sort of career trajectory that we can share with our audience. You know, Mejuri is such a beloved company. I'm a big fan, as you can see. And I think most of our listeners would probably agree that leading it sounds like an absolute dream job. So how did you get here? What did your career look like before starting Mejuri?
Yeah, absolutely. As Chantal mentioned, I'm a third generation in my family to work in jewelry. And I don't know why everybody who's been in jewelry, it's sort of very sticky. It's a DNA thing. It stays with us. So I grew up with jewelry. I grew up as an insider to the industry. I formulated a point of view about fine jewelry. Didn't love some of the positioning. When I thought of fine jewelry, I think of it, we were told it's this expensive product, classic designs, and typically marketed for men to buy for women. And it felt super traditional for me. So I decided not to continue in the same path. And I studied engineering, actually industrial engineering. I moved to Canada. I worked in consulting. I did my MBA. So really took a complete detour from the fine jewelry industry. And then, started to make disposable income. And if I wanted to buy jewelry for myself, it wasn't an obvious choice. So we decided to go back into the industry to create a brand, starting off with women buying jewelry for themselves. Really self-purchase is the sort of the overarching message. And I left my job and the rest is history.
Amazing. I think since Mejuri started and really made a splash in this space, I've seen a lot of other sort of affordable fine jewelry companies kind of popping up. What do you think still makes Mejuri like a leader in this space and makes Mejuri unique?
Yeah, I like to think of Mejuri. So we started in 2015 as a direct-to-consumer fine jewelry brand. I studied the market a lot. And if I describe the market, because it looks like a very crowded market, but it's a $200 billion market. Only 20% of it is actually branded and the remainder is fragmented. And that fragmentation is really a signal. Like if I compare this with watches is 60% branded. So it just tells us that there's a lot of opportunity for a brand to be created for the next generation. And when I think of a next generation brand, I think of focusing on the experience as much as we focus on the product. And so we really, while it looks like a very crowded industry, I think there is tremendous white space in it. And I think the way that when we say flipping the narrative, as simple as it sounds, but the entire infrastructure of the business has to be designed on self-purchase. So everything that we've done from product design, the way that we design, the frequency at which we design, our supply chain is compressed. And these two things helped us bring the drop model to the fine jewelry industry, introduce products every single week, bring freshness to the industry. And when I think of also how did we innovate differently is we put the community in the center of everything that we do. And so we think of Mejuri, we've built a community of 1 million followers, for example, on Instagram, which is, we didn't create that distance between us and the customer. And that is, to me, is part of a next generation brand. There's a lot of building blocks we've done in the business of owning the end-to-end experience, from technologies in-house, warehouse operations is in-house, marketing and creative. And that to me is, how do we evolve as a brand? How do we control the experience and evolve as much as possible? Have always been very important contributors to where Mejuri is today.
That's great. I think a lot from sort of the customer perspective, and maybe for a lot of people generally that have sort of seen, you know, a Mejuri store pop up near them, or started getting their ads in their Instagram feed, it seems like a total runaway success from the beginning. But I'm sure that for you, it probably was not. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about, you know, what your early experiences were like getting the company off the ground, and what some of those challenges were and how you overcame them.
Yeah, someone once told me, what is it? Overnight success takes a very long time. That's how it looks on,
right.
on the outside. But it was a lot of hard work. You know, I'll tell you something. We raised over 48 million in funding. And I always say my first million was the hardest to secure. And at the time when I was pitching fine jewelry, everybody was pitching technology and AI. And obviously fine jewelry was not like the thing that people wanted to back at the time. Now things are completely different. And so that was very challenging in the beginning, is build a company, having limited resources, trying to secure funding was a really challenging time. But when I look at it on the flip side, is we didn't get access to a ton of capital in the beginning, which, to be honest, forced us to have healthy constraints and become sharper on where do we innovate, where do we add value to the customer, really think of what are the metrics that we care about. So to answer your question, it wasn't, and it continues to be a challenging ride. And I think if it's not challenging, a lot of people would be starting businesses. But yeah, every stage of the business has a different degree of challenge to it. But that was the stickiest point for me, is the beginning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've read and heard you talk a lot about that that process of fundraising in the past. And it's really interesting to think about, you know, going into that space, and like you said, most of it being sort of tech companies pitching. So
yeah, we knew, to be honest, my conviction in what we're building since the beginning is I very much believe that we can build the next generation global brand. And so that conviction led us to want to be a venture backed. It doesn't, you know, venture backed is not necessarily the only way to build a business, but for us it made sense because speed of execution was super important, and that's why we chose to be venture backed. But there's really amazing businesses that choose not to be, and to be self-funded, and that's completely fine as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And you sort of touched on a couple of things already, one of them being staying really close to your community, and some of these other techniques for how you've managed to scale. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about any tools or methods that you've used for navigating how to scale your business, where to take it next, what direction to go in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. A little bit of history about also how we've started the business. So when we first started, I was part of Founder Fuel, which is a Montreal-based program. It's an accelerator. And that's when I started to sort of really gain a lot of knowledge of experimentation. You know, we launched the business out of Founder Fuel essentially. And then few months later, call it, I think it was 9 months later, we ended up also in 500 Startups, which is one of the accelerators in San Francisco, one of the top accelerators. And what that was important, what sort of that contributed to the business is us being around other types of businesses, and essentially understanding how to pull levers, how to create experimentation, and how to try things and be comfortable with failure. And in the beginning, you're sort of navigating to figure out product market fit, and having that lens of how do you build a high growth business, you really have to try different things. You really have to have appetite for risk and appetite for failure. And as soon as you figure something out is working, then you double down on it. But I get questions about what is the one thing that you've done to really scale the business. My point of view about this, to be honest, from the beginning, is we have to hit strides across all areas of the business, and that will have a compounded effect. And I can't necessarily be very focused on brand while we're, for example, lagging on supply chain. You have to have mandates across the entire business. And I think lastly, just to sort of talk about the community aspect, we always say we are building Mejuri. To be Mejuri on the outside is like Mejuri on the inside. And that, to me, just thinking of your business that way, especially when we're talking about brands, it becomes less of an effort to actually stay consistent, to build a brand and to build connection with your community. And I think it's super important for founders and those who work on brands to be very honest of what are our values internally and externally, and how do we actually, walk the talk, essentially.
Right, amazing. Yes, I think, that's more important than ever these days after coming out of the pandemic situation and all of the sort of changes that brought about in terms of how we work as well.
Yeah.
So obviously Mejuri is a huge success in Canada, but you've also expanded elsewhere in the world. Can you talk a little bit about how easy it was to scale up in Canada, or how difficult it was to scale up in Canada versus some other places like the United States?
Right. So I think starting in Canada has a ton of advantages, and I absolutely love being here. We have access to talent, amazing talent. There's a lot of programs that support startups, although primarily on the technology side. Scaling up anywhere is really difficult, but I think over here, it gave us access to a lot of great people to work with us and a support network. But to be quite honest, we never only thought of Canada only. And that's what I encourage a lot of Canadian companies is, why don't we expand our market? And since the beginning, we really focused on Canada and the United States. And we never actually just thought of being in one market. And I think that's really important, because there's a lot of learnings that we can have here that we can implement there, and vice versa. Especially at the time that we launched, e-com penetration was much higher in the US, and it made sense for us to learn so much over there and be effective at, while the Canadian customer gets more and more comfortable with e-com. So lots of advantages of operating out of here, but I would encourage people who are able to, target multiple markets, is to do it right off the bat.
Great, amazing. And you sort of answered this already, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on, do you think Canada is a good place to start a business? Were there any challenges to doing that here that, maybe would have been different elsewhere?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, starting a business here is really positive. I think that like I said, there's a lot of government programs targeted towards technology primarily. There's access to talent, but on the flip side, what I found to be difficult is, I think, funding for, or at least at the time that we were raising capital, funding for brands and funding for product-led businesses is always challenging over here when you compare it to the US. So I think it's more catered towards financial services or technology from a funding standpoint. But I do hear over the past 5-6 years, things have become a lot more different in the landscape, and I think it's a great place to be. But I think it's just being cognizant that, getting funding across different industries may not be as easy as it is, for example, in the United States. And, and that's completely fine. You can definitely have support from both areas. But, I wouldn't have changed it.
Good. Happy to hear that from a Canadian business magazine standpoint. And then what advice would you have for entrepreneurs, particularly anyone who wants to make a mark in the retail space, which just seems to be changing all the time and has its own unique challenges, as you know? Is there anything that you think they absolutely need to know before they get into it? Anything you wish you'd known before you started?
Yeah, I think that in retail, I find product market fit is as important as it is for technology businesses. What's your point of view on the product that you're selling? And I think it takes a lot of studying and trial and error and talking to customers to really figure this out. And once you figure it out, I would really focus on growing the base of customers through our organic referrals, because that really indicates that people really like the brand, as opposed to primarily focused on paid marketing. And I think it's really important in the beginning to see that your community is growing through word of mouth. Paid acquisition becomes something that you fuel growth with, but you really want to see that in the beginning. Generally speaking, for retail, we started actually opening physical retail stores about 4 years ago. And to be honest, it's been such a wonderful journey to also have that omni experience for our customers. So I would encourage entrepreneurs that when it makes sense to actually look at the complement between online and offline, and not necessarily think in one channel. Offline is a great way to be in touch with the customer. It's an acquisition channel, and a lot of customers really want to come and touch and feel the product. They want the convenience to go and return a product in a physical space. So, contrary to what we used to think in the beginning that e-com is the way, I think it's multi-channel. And I think the rising prices of acquiring customers, or cost of acquiring customers online and competition, is just showing us that having multi-channel is really, really important to acquire and build loyalty with our customer base.
And do you find that that has shifted at all since the pandemic? Like, is it maybe too early to tell, but I'm really interested to know, will shoppers be getting back out to stores? Like, are they eager for that, bricks and mortar experience again, or has e-com just totally taken over as a virtue of the pandemic?
Yeah, so my point of view is, so e-com, we got more comfortable of buying everything online. So I think e-com has become, a lot of people who weren't shopping are now shopping online. So it broke the barrier for a lot of people, which then poses a ton of opportunity for businesses to be online. But we also saw that people, as soon as lockdowns were lifted, and we operate in different markets. We have 6 stores in the US, 1 in Canada, 1 in London recently. And as soon as we lifted the lockdown was lifted, people wanted to be in stores. People wanted to touch and feel the product. We all miss that experience. We all miss being together, shopping, browsing. I don't think it's going to go away. But what we've also noticed is really what I mentioned is the convenience. So when we had to shut down all 6 stores for a period of time, and so we worked on creating a buy online, pick up in store mechanism. And as soon as we launched that, people started using it. And it just indicated to us is that, retail is a place to transact, a place to discover, and a place for convenience. So it's sort of looking at that entire experience for the customer. I'm very, very excited about retail personally, just looking at our retail stores, the outlook of what retail looks like. And from discoveries of trying to get retail locations, it looks like a lot of people are excited about retail, and there's a lot of competition out there.
Oh, that's exciting. I'm also someone who likes to sort of go and look and feel, and to your point, I think the convenience of it too, right? Like, we often think of online shopping as more convenient, but going into a store certainly has its benefits in terms of the immediacy and being able to sort of see everything and have that customer service experience as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think, when companies really scale at rates like Mejuri has, leadership, I think, becomes so much more important. What would you say makes a good leader, in your opinion? And maybe you can also sort of talk a little bit about the experiences you've had throughout your career that have helped shape your own leadership style.
Yeah, I have a very long list, but I'll try to, maybe I'm very demanding, but I'll try to think of what's most relevant. So for me personally, I grew through feedback and transparency. So I really appreciate leaders who can have a productive relationship with their teams to bring productive level of feedback. And I think that's how people learn and I know it's a cliche to say feedback is a gift, but I think it's super important to surround yourself with people who can actually tell you what's working and what can be done better. So I would say feedback is a really foundational step, and it also indicates the level of rapport that you can build with people because you're comfortable to give feedback or receive feedback. But I think over the past couple of years, we've learned that leading with empathy is not sort of a nice to have. I think it's something that is super important for every leader to have, and it's really to really try to put yourself in other person's position and to see what motivates them and what's going on, and to really have a more human approach to leadership than what we're used to. I think that's really, really key and important. And obviously other things, I'll talk about a high growth business. Leadership in a high growth business to me is having an owner mentality. And essentially how that translates to me is someone who can problem solve, who has a relentless drive for results, and can model that for their teams and bring clarity to sort of the way that we're going to get results. And lastly, one of my favorite qualities of everybody to work in Mejuri is really ego. And I think, I call myself someone who's a constant work in progress. I know that I don't know everything, and I have to seek knowledge. I have to grow. I have to evolve with the evolution of the business. I have to reinvent myself regularly. And I do expect that the best leaders have the same mentality.
That's great. I'd love to sort of highlight there one thing you said that I really appreciated, which was about leading with empathy. I think that a lot of leaders sort of, we talk about this and we take courses on it and we think we know how to lead with empathy. But what you said about really putting yourself in someone's shoes, I think it's so important to have that really individual approach of sort of noticing, what is going on for this individual person? What do they need? How can I help them through this? And I think that's really where we need to sort of get to that next step with leadership.
Yeah,
and it's really great to hear leaders speaking about that now.
100%. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, every business is about execution, and execution is driven by fantastic people. And so that is the essence of every business. And so for us at Mejuri, for example, we do regularly engagement surveys and ask a lot of questions to really understand where can we improve and what we're doing well. But during the pandemic, we used to do on a bi-weekly basis to really just check in on people. And we've invested in people management programs to make sure that we are having that one-on-one conversations. And we just also started a coaching program. We brought in a professional coach into the business so that, we can help upskill and evolve leadership skills for our teams so that they can help their teams. So these are things I think are no longer nice to have. And I think there are things that we have to invest in, especially with the way that work is going to be, a hybrid. You're not going to see your team all the time. You can't see the gestures. Right. You can't read. I can't know over Zoom all the time how someone's feeling. So you really have to up your skills to make sure that you can gauge and support and be there for your team.
That's right. It's great. And that leads nicely to the next question, which is, what do you think within the sort of Canadian business landscape is missing or needs to be improved upon when it comes to leadership?
That's a good question. I don't know that I've ever thought about it that way. I think, to be honest, I always say we have a huge benefit of operating here in Canada because we have really, it's a super multicultural country. And it's also, we have access to a lot of amazing talent here. And I feel like, I don't know that I can pinpoint something that is really missing from a leadership standpoint. I think what I can tell you is that the examples of high growth businesses over here and the culture of that is still evolving. And I think when I go, for example, to San Francisco, which everybody will say the same thing, it's in the air. And, right. and I think when that becomes like the norm in the ecosystem, speed of execution, how we think, how we solve problems, even the talent, all of it uplifts, to be honest. So I think that is what I'm excited about, is to start to see more and more companies that are in high growth mode that will then naturally shape the talent that we have, and that will naturally make it, makes us even more and more competitive as a market compared to the US, where there's a lot of high growth businesses and a lot of talent and a lot of sort of, they're used to the approaches of a high growth businesses. I think that is what I think we're catching up to.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think what's nice to see about it too is we do have, as you said, more and more of these high growth businesses really getting traction in Canada, and from a wide range of sectors, and with a really diverse group of leaders too, which I think will, to your point about multiculturalism, really benefit us and sort of give us a unique perspective on that kind of leadership as well.
Yeah, it does. I think though, at certain point in the business, like it's so important for us to keep the high growth businesses in Canada, because at a certain point,
absolutely,
when you hit a certain scale, you have to hire executives that have been there, done that. Like that becomes a requirement because you need a specialist. And so the more that we have of specialists in Canada, the more then we can hire here and not have to look abroad. And I think that would be very, very key.
Absolutely. So we're coming into holiday season. This must be one of the busiest times for Mejuri. What's next for you? What's next for Mejuri? Do you have anything that you can share with the audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the key things that we're focused on right now is our road to retail expansion across the world, essentially. And that obviously indicates our also plans for more and more international expansion. So these two key things are very important to us. Every year we focus on net new portfolios of products. I'm not going to spill the beans. I'll keep everybody, on their toes to just watch for the product part. And we're continuously hitting strides on our sustainability roadmap, which I'm extremely proud of. We launched recently, we announced our commitment to 100% traceability of our core materials and achieved 100% traceability on our gold, which is our highest use material. So I'm very excited to continue to chip away at this, as complicated as it is, but it's a really cool challenge.
Amazing. Well, that's great. I see we have a couple of audience questions coming in. So why don't we open it up to the floor? Our first question is from Dana, and she says, "Hi, Noura." She says she's from Founder Fuel 14. So she's asking, do you think that Instagram was as much a part of your product as the goods themselves? And how comfortable were you with the steep marketing costs early on versus over time?
That's a good question. So we launched at a time when Instagram was picking up. So I think that's also an advantage. I think that the brand was a super important component. Instagram is a way to manifest it visually to our target audience. And we focused heavily on Instagram. So it's just a way to contextualize our product through amazing creators, through the brand. So it was a very important part of Mejuri's growth. And in terms of the marketing, so in the beginning, we really focused as much as possible on, partnerships, a word of mouth, a customer experience, a lot more than marketing, paid marketing. But again, we came at a different time, right? So that worked for us in the beginning, email marketing partnerships, etc. Now I recognize that that's also just as competitive as paid. So I think right now, as long as you're tracking, you have healthy unit economics, as long as your customer acquisition cost, your gross margin, you're looking at your LTV. And for early stage, I think LTV is not necessarily an easy metric, but as long as you're keeping things on track and you have very healthy early results on retention of your customers, then I think you should be comfortable to understand what's your return on investment for marketing. But to wrap it up, I think in the beginning, really focus on anything that brings organic growth over paid.
Great. We have a question from Cynthia. I really like this one. Have you had to compromise, tweak, or adjust your vision along the way as you grew your business?
I don't think vision hasn't changed, to be honest, from the beginning. I think you continue to evolve it, if I would say. Every element of the business, I'm never comfortable where we are, which is good and exhausting at the same time. So,
I can imagine, yeah.
So I think there's a constant evolution. I think what I learned also from it's really ties to the question in a way. What I learned from San Francisco is failure is a data point. They're comfortable with it. It made me feel comfortable with sometimes not necessarily materializing on specific plans. And so vision wise, I think it stays constant. How we get there 100% has to be tweaked.
Was there anything, just as sort of a follow-up to that, was there anything unexpected that came up that sort of caused you to have to really pivot? Or was it sort of just a matter of, like you said, kind of adjusting in sort of smaller ways as you went along?
I think I might state the obvious here, but the most painful thing is COVID.
Of course, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, we were opening, we literally were building 2 stores when we had to shut down. We were putting fuel on the fire when things were out of control. So that COVID is challenged every single person, personally, professionally, but leaders, I think we had another set of complications to deal with, constantly figuring things out the first time, like unprecedented situations all the time. So I think, to be honest, before that, I probably would have had a different answer, but I don't think anything comes close to what we faced in the past 18 to 2 years.
and hopefully doesn't from now on either.
I hope it's done, yeah.
We got a related question actually from Ron. Ron is asking, as a fast-growing business in the midst of the pandemic, which has brought forth an evolving workplace, currently hybrid, what are the top 3 things you are doing to maintain and nurture your culture? And in addition, how are you bridging the workforce experience with your retail workforce on site and in person with the rest of the business? He's got another question tacked at the end here, but I'll let you take it off with those 2.
So there's the 3 things. I like to think of them as constantly evolving, because like I said, there's new things that are happening right now in the world all the time. So we define focus areas, we work on them, and then we add additional focus areas. But as I alluded to, I'll tell you a few things that I think are very important. We've invested in starting a learning and development area in the business. Recognizing that we are a high growth business, recognizing that there's a need to upskill our current team so that they can grow with the growth of the business was very important for us to invest in that, and also coaching. And so these 2 things are very important to set the foundations for and to invest in. Second thing, in terms of what we're focused on, we've done some of the clearly, the days off to make summer Fridays, things we'd never used to do before, to make sure that people are taking time off. We are spend time on people management to make sure that we're asking the right questions. We are gauging how people are feeling as much as possible, as much as they're willing, obviously, to open up. Trying to put protocols around, Slack and way of work, and because asynchronous is also a thing. There's parents, which is a tough thing. Parents who can't work during the day, they're going to have to work at night. And so you're going to have, we have to adjust to accepting there's asynchronous work, but it doesn't mean that you have to be on the whole time. So sort of bringing these shifts that are happening in all businesses, how are we going to deal with them? And how are we going to give people permission to also feel what they're feeling, and to give permission to people to put boundaries as well. These are some of the examples that we think about. In terms of retail, I'm not sure I understand. It's the connection between retail. What was the question? Sorry.
How are you bridging the workforce experience with your retail workforce, so on-site, in person, with the rest of the business? So maybe what Ron's getting at there is sort of, I don't know, do you have a different approach for how you lead that sort of on the ground staff versus your maybe in-office business during this time?
I mean, we're all one team, different lines of businesses. We also have a fulfillment center. We have also, an office in Argentina. We are very multifaceted, which is exciting, but also challenging. The people team for HR, the people team for retail rolls under the corporate retail team. So we have specialized L&D, specialized people, managers that are really taking care of retail, but they're all under the same umbrella of corporate. And so we stay connected also through, we have a retail corporate operations team that also bridges the gap between both. We have town halls for retail. We have, the teams are connected at all times, and our retail operations team does a fantastic job on checking in all the time with our store managers and having very strong connections with them.
Great. And then the last question from Ron here was this, how have you balanced growth with the challenges of supply chain while meeting or exceeding your customers' expectations?
Yeah, we are in a unique situation where our supply chain was not as impacted as other industries by nature of the size of the product is sent by air, for example, which is makes it easier, the size of the product. We also had quite a global supply chain production partners across the world. So when one geography was being impacted, we were able to work with another geography. And so the team did a fantastic job in de-risking our key products across the globe. So I'm very proud of the work that the team has done, but we didn't have as much of an impact as, call it, apparel, for example.
Great. We've got another question here. This is from an anonymous attendee. Celebrity support is huge in the jewelry and direct-to-consumer space. How does a product-based company secure this kind of support? Was it organic for you, or or did you send them products? A very direct question there.
I'll have to connect you with our PR team, but I'll tell you,
Right.
it's not paid. That's what I'll tell you.
Great. And then another one here. You mentioned that jewelry was a family business. Do you ever tap into your family members for advice or support? And are they surprised that you pivoted from engineering back to the jewelry business?
So the business, so Mejuri is very, very different from the family business. It's very traditional retail. So advice is not necessarily, I would say, relevant per se. I took a lot from what watching my father. He cared about every single relationship with customers. He went and sourced the jewelry and the stones himself. And that to me, it just shows the level of integrity that's needed with this industry. And I think I take that with me, and it's super important. So the two businesses are completely different and not interconnected. And were they surprised? I mean, I don't know if they were surprised. I think they're used to the way that I operate. And I think, I think that I've always loved the industry, and they were happy that I went back in a very different perspective. Definitely cautious about the decision that I made, because selling diamonds and gold online wasn't necessarily very intuitive for my father. But I always operate with a why not mentality, right?
Great. I've got a question from Chantel, and this is, your products and brand are beautiful. How does Mejuri offer tips in creating your own personal style when most will only copy seasonal trends or what they see popular influencers doing?
Yeah, so I think the design process for us is really fun. So we have two different types of products. You have the basics, obviously, like your white t-shirt that we have to operate, and it's great quality. And so we have the basics, and we want to have them as foundational pieces. And we have our differentiated designs, the Charlotte and the croissant.
Right.
And so I think what we've done is the way that we design product, we are in constant mode of design. Literally, we're constantly designing product, and not necessarily for a specific season. And I think that's the trick for us, is we're always looking at what's our take on this, what's relevant, what's exciting, what is our next pattern. And so we're always challenging, I think, competing with ourselves primarily. It doesn't mean we're not looking at trends and what's going on in Instagram. Like, these are great inspiration places. But I think our our product drop model, and which is the weeklies, really helped us get in a position to not necessarily think in a very specific sort of occasion, and really spread out our thoughts to styling, layering, and building your own unique take of how you want to wear your jewelry. And then on the other side, we also fortify it with our editorial, which is we have focused on creating collaborations with influencers and partners, whether be it on Instagram, or also our style edits to showcase jewelry on different people and how they want to style it. And we give them freedom to style it their way.
Wonderful. We have a question here from Ramsey, who also says, great interview and good question. So thank you, Ramsey. Do you manage to balance your personal life? Oh, sorry. How do you manage to balance your personal life and the business? Do you keep thinking about the company all the time, or do you try to take time off?
Yeah.
This is the ultimate challenge, right?
Yeah, it's the ultimate challenge. So I think, listen, I think of this very differently. And I think I don't think of it as a balance. I think this is my life, which includes my friends, my hobbies, my work. I'm okay with it intertwining. I do I have twins, and they're almost 3 years old. I'm very militant about the time that I spend with them. So I put boundaries on the key things that I don't necessarily want to be interrupted when I'm doing them. And I design it that way. And I encourage anybody in our business and anybody out there to do the same. But it doesn't mean personally, I don't have to stop thinking about work. It doesn't drain me personally, but it's different for different people. So there are instances when I, completely want to be off and try my best to do good delegation to the team so that I can take that time off. Easier said right now because we have a larger team and because I can do these things. But in the past, no, there was no balance in the beginning, and it is what it is. It's the truth. If you want to build a business, people think you're more free. Absolutely not. You are not more free. You are absolutely on the opposite side of free.
That's right. Okay, well, I think that leads us to the end of our audience questions, unless we have any coming in the next, we'll give it a couple seconds here, but I think we covered a lot of really great topics here. And I think that, oh, we've got one that's just come in. Not sure if this is maybe one that will work, but you let me know what kind of market segments do you usually develop on the business? I think that might be a little too general. I'm not sure I know exactly what we're getting at here, but if the person, this is an anonymous question, if you have a bit more of a specific follow-up to that, please pop it in the chat. Tips for getting funding for a new business. Well, that's a big one.
So I think, first of all, know the industry, the business. When you're talking to, it depends who you're talking to. So let's assume you're going to talk to a VC. A VC obviously will want the business to grow very fast and at great multiples, right? So knowing that you have and recognizing that you can get there and you have an opportunity in this market and what you're solving for. So having confidence and conviction in what you're going after is necessary, and being able to articulate it to the investors also very important. It depends on what stage, but the primary tip that I would tell you is build relationships with people way before you actually need the money, so you get to know them. And think of it this way, it's a two-way street. No one's doing anybody favors. You also have to like who you're working with. So build relationships, keep people updated on your business, get to know them, let them get to know you. And by the time you actually want to raise capital, it doesn't feel transactional. That to me is super important, to bring the right partners on board. Obviously learn that after seed funding. I guess, that's what you start to deploy after seed funding, essentially.
Great. Well, thank you for that. This was wonderful. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing all of your experiences. We look forward to seeing what is happening with you and Mejuri next, and take care.
Thank you so much, Charlotte.